Okay, so for those of you who are here and are waiting, today's session is the last of sessions that we currently have set up. Although I do have other things in the work, you guys know that I'm always working on your behalf uh, to get more
Hi, Tricia.
information. Hello. Just doing some housekeeping, Larry, before we get started.
Sure.
So as you guys attendees know, I'm always working on your behalf to get as much information and knowledge shared as possible as we await licenses. So this is the last of our scheduled sessions. I'm actually working with the consultant on hiring, who does hiring in the cannabis space, hiring and recruiting, to talk about hiring for cannabis businesses specifically. That would be sometime next month. We're just trying to work out what date that will be. And then I've got some other things that I'm planning to work on, but I'm not in a place yet to announce those because there's still too much up in the air concerning those things. Um, so I want to make sure that you guys are aware of that, and then also make sure that you guys are aware of the fact that we will be sending out a survey after today's presentation. It's a survey. If you've been with us for a while, you know that I try to group surveys together so you're not getting bombarded if you come to everything that we do. So in the one survey, you will be able to answer for every session that you've attended in the last month and a half. And so um, it's really important that we get your feedback because that feedback does go back to DCEO and actually does also go to the governor's office. So we actually had I had a real recent conversation with DCEO with all of the technical assistance providers concerning surveys and feedback. So we've been doing surveys and feedback all along. So getting your feedback on these ad hoc sessions that we've added in the last month will definitely be critical just to see what their usefulness was for you and that type of information. And if there's any, and then there's also space in there for you to add anything that you want to add, you know, any narrative that you want to add, because obviously, like I said, it will get passed on to DCEO and eventually the governor's office. So be on the lookout for that in the next 24 hours.
Okay.
And with that being said, I think we are ready to get started with today's session. So today's session is about, you know, starting your cannabis business and some of the things, best practices and things that you need to do to be able to get started, and even some of the things you can be doing right now while we await the licenses. So our presenters today are Larry Mishkin of Hoban Law and Jim Marty, CEO and founder of Bridge West CPAs. Um, for those of you who do not know, I, we shared a webinar that actually was sponsored by Bridge West. I think it was about a month or so ago, maybe a little bit longer. You know, and it was a lot of really good information that was being shared for existing businesses, but also good information for those of you who were planning to get started. Um, in terms of what do we do now in preparation for tax season and for next year and all of those things. So this webinar was really as a result of having attended that, knowing that there's more information that could be shared for you guys who are, you know, planning to get started in the cannabis business as opposed to having already started. So some of the best practices and things that you can do now to get started on the right footing so that you don't encounter issues later. So with that being said, I will turn it over to Jim and Larry. And I will mute myself. Oh, let me say this one thing before I do that. I will mute myself and turn my camera off. If you have questions as we go through today's session, please type them in the Q&A box. And then at the end of the session, I will moderate the question and answer period. So then that way we get all of the questions answered. So with that being said, now I'll turn it over to Jim and Larry.
And thank you very much, Tricia. And before we get started, I was just curious, how many attendees do we have, Tricia?
Currently, we have 8 right now. And sometimes we have people join late, so
Sure.
that number will probably increase.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you very much. I appreciate everybody's time. I've given you all a chance to see our pictures and read our brief bios. So with that, we'll just jump right in. We probably have a better part of an hour presentation, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. So getting started. Here are some of the things you need to be thinking about at a high level. And then Larry, as you may know, Larry Mishkin actually works in Illinois, works and lives in the Chicago area. So he'll be able to give the attendees a lot of good information about what's going on in Illinois specifically. But from a high level, get to know the regulations that apply to you and what you want to do. Really learn those regulations. Don't leave it up to your lawyer or your advisors. Jump right in, download them, print them off, mark them up, know them as well as your attorney does, so that when the questions come up, you're well versed. Secondly, secure your real estate. Most cannabis applications require you to note your real estate. Is it properly zoned? Is it in a city or a town that allows for medical or adult use cannabis? Is it far enough away from a school or a church or a rehab center? And then get a lease or purchase the real estate so that you can note your real estate on your application. And then start building your team. You're going to need cultivation experts, business leaders, CFO, chief operating officer, chief financial officer. Sometimes when a business is starting from scratch, especially one of your craft licenses, you, the founder, might be wearing many of these hats, but you'll still need help. So put your team together, start thinking about who's going to run your retail as a manager, who will be your bud tenders, and then look at your form of entity. Are you going to be a corporation or a partnership? What are the advantages and disadvantages? That's where a CPA firm like Bridge West comes in. We can help advise you on the benefits, but also detriments to some of the forms of entities. They all have good attributes. They all have things that are detriments. So you really want to go over those and figure out what's best for your team. And then start thinking about your accounting system. You're going to need a point of sale system. Larry, what does the state of Illinois use? Is it metric?
Yes.
You'll need to understand the metric system for tracking your inventory. Many of our clients use metric, and metric is very good at weight. It's very good at tracking every gram of cannabis as it's grown. Every plant gets tagged. The harvested marijuana gets weighed and entered into the system. It's tracked as it moves from the cultivation over to the retail location. But what metric does not do is track costs. And so you need to track your weight, but you also need to track your costs. So if you're cultivating, you have to understand how much it costs you to grow a gram or a pound. So tracking your weight as well as your costs is very important. So early on, start thinking about your accounting system and your point of sale system. At this point, I'm going to let Larry take the next few slides, and I'll be adding some commentary.
Thanks, Jim. As we move on to the next slides, before we, as we jump off that last page, there's one thing I want to point out to everyone there. Jim covered a lot of very, very important general topics. Thanks, Jim. And these are things you have to do. However, the truth of the matter is that there's very few people out there, unless you're a true cannabis expert or experienced in the industry, who knows how to do a lot of this stuff. Or it may be that you're very well versed on the cannabis side if you've been in the industry for a while, but you just don't really know the business side of it. And that's what Jim and I see a lot. And Jim is being very nice here when he goes ahead and puts, he and I really at the bottom, and quite frankly, the accounting system at the bottom. The truth of the matter is this. If you want to get into marijuana, the very first person you should hire is an accountant. And this is what we see all the time. You have to have an accountant. Why? Because you have to have a business plan to raise money to get started. And if you're going to have a business plan, you have to have somebody who understands Rule 280E and the impact that it's going to have on your finances and therefore your financial plan. Or you're going to get some guy later on who's going to say, hey, wait a second, where did all this extra tax come from? You never told me about this up front. If you don't understand the financial system of marijuana and legal cannabis, then you're wasting your time trying to get into this industry, because your business can only succeed to the extent that it runs strongly in that regard. And that's really where Jim and his group come into play. And he is being modest when he doesn't talk about that very much. But Bridge West, of course, is one of the first groups, and Jim Marty, one of the first attorneys who's ever, accountants who's ever stepped out and was willing to sign a cannabis tax return. So please make sure that you have an accountant in place. Please make sure you have an attorney in place, because those people will help you work your way through the maze of all the things that we're going to talk about, the legal issues, even the business side of the issues, and it can only benefit your business. The worst thing is when I have a client who comes in and says, well, I already signed my lease. I've already signed my employment contracts. What do you think? And you look at them, and once they're signed, they're signed. There's nothing I can do about that. So you want your professionals in at the beginning to help you out. As I say, Jim Marty and Bridge West have experience. The Hoban Law Group is a 100% cannabis firm. We have attorneys all over the country, and we are always ready to step in and help out people as they begin their cannabis businesses. So please keep that in mind as we move forward with today's topics. Okay, Jim, slide.
Okay, very good. And thank you for the nice endorsement. I would follow that up by simply saying that Bridge West is licensed to do business as a CPA firm in Illinois. So we'd be happy to help you with your tax and accounting issues on your applications or later on when you get your license.
Right. Well, fair enough. And if you call me in Illinois as to who your CPA should be, you're going to be calling Jim anyway. So let's move on here and take a look at things that we have. So in Illinois, at least where we are right now, is in that kind of uncomfortable middle ground. We've all been busting our butt for months and months to get the applications finalized. We responded to the notices from the state of deficiencies, whatever they might be. And now, as far as a lot of us are concerned, it's really in the hands of the state. And there's not a whole lot we can do until the state gets back to us, whenever that might be, and gives us an answer. And although I'll be making a lot of reference to Illinois today, most of what we're talking about really applies to any state. If there's a competitive application system and you go through this process where you've submitted the application and you're sitting around waiting for the state to answer, what we're going to talk about today becomes very, very relevant for you. And this is the kind of stuff that you really need to know. A good part of this presentation was originally prepared for groups that were going to be working towards getting their cultivation licenses. And that's why you'll see, like, for instance, with number 1, where it talks about the type of grow system you're going to have. Obviously, something like that doesn't have a lot of particular relevance to someone who's applying for a dispensary. But nevertheless, when you see something, what kind of a grow system are you going to have? For dispensary owners, it's really the same type of thing, and saying, what type of a retail outlet are you going to have? How do you envision setting up your retail outlet, and where your point of sale, and how you're going to display your products and things like that? But certainly from the perspective of the cultivators, because let's not kid ourselves, there's a lot more work to be done to get a cultivation up and running and built out, and all the equipment that you're going to need, which isn't to say dispensary owners don't have a lot to do, but you don't need all of the kind of grow equipment and extraction equipment and things like that that a grow needs. And as we see in point number 2 here, we have all of this laid out in terms of the types of equipment that cultivators typically need to be on the lookout for and be ready to go with. One of the keys to all of this is that when you find out you get your license, either because the state is going to tell you that you have to be up and running within a certain period of time, or because you want to be first into the market and take advantage of that, the more of this that you can have done in advance, the better you're going to be in terms of being able to dive in. So you don't want to wake up the day after you get your license and for the first time sit down and think, well, what kind of a grow system am I going to have? What type of dispensary system am I going to have? Because if you're making the decision for the first time, then you've already put yourself behind the 8 ball, and you're going to have to really hustle and do a lot more work. Once again, we note about checking with consultants. Consultants are experts. I can tell you about the law. Jim can tell you about accounting. We can both tell you just enough about the operation of one of these things to be dangerous. But you get a guy who's run a cultivation center in California or Colorado for the last 5 to 10 years, or somebody who's run a dispensary, and you're getting people who will know the issues that you're going to face and will be able to tell you how you make sure you deal with those issues. And certainly in terms of what type of equipment you have to be prepared to purchase, that's what you want to be on the lookout for. And if you're going to go into extraction, it's just that much more equipment that you need to have. So you have to shop around. Who's going to give me the best price? Who gives me the best warranties? What does the industry say about what's state of the art? And you know, what are the consumers who are the products being manufactured for top dollar consumers? You know, how are those products being manufactured, and how can I maintain and ensure similar levels of quality with my products?
Very good, Larry. Just a couple of quick comments on this slide. I'll knock some of this out of the way. One of the questions I get all the time, not just from my clients, but from people who I meet socially, I heard that you can't take any deductions if you're in the cannabis business. Well, that's partially true, but what is deductible is your cost of goods sold. So anything that goes into producing the product is deductible. What's not deductible, and I call them the big three, are retail rent, retail labor, and advertising. So virtually everything on this slide that you're looking at is going to be deductible through depreciation over time. And the other thing to be aware of is if you buy any of this equipment or supplies online, that you, the purchaser, are responsible for the sales tax. So if you're buying things online, be aware of what your responsibilities are related to sales and use tax. Now, some states and some cities and counties have exemptions for agriculture and for manufacturing. So you could be subject to paying the sales tax, but you could also qualify for an exemption. So just be aware of that as you buy your equipment. And feel free to talk to the seller and say, hey, who's responsible for the sales tax? Do you know of any exemptions here? And maybe I'm in Clark County, Nevada. Are there some exemptions for sales tax? Moving on, and Larry and I are going to try to not spend much time on each slide because we have a lot of good material for you, and we want to respect everybody's time and finish up in about an hour.
So as we move on to this next slide, thank you, Jim, for that. And please pay attention to those tax issues, because tax issues are what typically are the dispensary owner's worst enemy in terms of problems that you're going to have to be fighting as you get up and going. Whether you need a full set of growing equipment and extraction equipment, whether you just need the types of materials necessary to build out a dispensary, I don't care who you're buying it from. You need to know where those products are being manufactured and where they're being shipped from. This becomes very, very important, especially right now during the time of a pandemic, when normal shipping modes and routes and all of that are already running behind schedule and running into additional problems, manpower shortages and all sorts of things. You know, it isn't a situation if you're ordering your grow equipment from China where you can expect to get your license on Monday, call them on Tuesday, and have your stuff by Friday. Even under the best of circumstances, they may tell you that it could take 2 to 3 weeks or a month or more for that equipment to be shipped out and actually received by you. So when you're ordering this equipment, or when you're thinking about ordering the equipment, you should be looking at and asking the people you're purchasing it from, where is this equipment being manufactured? What is the typical delivery time? And then you need to emphasize to them the situation, what's going to be important to you to be able to go right away and pull the trigger as soon as you find out you have your license and expect a quick delivery. But, you know, especially with China, right, we have logistics issues, tariffs issues. In the United States, we run into a lot of that. And although we typically don't see a lot of problems with grow equipment coming into the country, we do always want people to note and understand that there are some customs agents who are more determined than others to find what they believe to be evidence of mischief on the cannabis side. And so you always just have to take into account that something that you need might wind up on a confiscated shelf in the customs department and not show up on your doorstep. And if you're sitting around weeks and weeks waiting for your equipment to arrive while your competitors are all getting up and running, you will not be happy.
Yes, and I'll speak for Larry here, give him a pat on the back because he has had these issues where he has gone to try to get refunds for people who don't get their equipment and fighting with customs people and even within the United States, there's been issues with things crossing borders where Larry's had to go to bat for his clients.
Well, thank you, Jim. I appreciate that. And yes, we do. We run into that quite a bit, much more than any of us would like, given where we'd like to think the industry is these days. But it's a fact of business that you have to, normal planning times for normal businesses just don't apply here. One of the things that some of my clients have tried is when they order equipment, paying in advance for it. And the goal is, look, I'll pay in advance. You'll guarantee me timely delivery. And then you negotiate a clause in there that says that if I wind up not getting a license, then you'll give me a refund of either all or 85 or 90% or something like that. As long as you're dealing with a reputable company, that could also be a good way to make sure that you're ready to move as soon as you find out the good news.
Thank you.
Well, this is the topic that we all like to focus on and actually kind of joke about. And we hear lines such as, immaculate conception and things like that, right? Because if you're a grower and you're in a state that's never had a program before, where are you going to get your seeds from? Presumably, if marijuana has been illegal in your state up until now, there isn't marijuana. Now, we know there is, but the state doesn't recognize it. And we know that there's seeds out there, but the state doesn't recognize it. And what are you going to do when you really want to grow 4 or 5 strains that you found when you were out in California last year, but you have to get those seeds or those clones from California, cross a bunch of state lines, breaking rules and laws all over the place to get it back to you? And the short answer to that, and I've got my examples. I'm sure Jim has his examples. Anyone in this industry has seen it already. People, they ship all their stuff across, they declare everything, and then they get on the airplane with the seeds in their pocket and they don't say anything about them. Or they have a friend ship it to them in different packaging or different boxes. But typically what we've seen is, at least on the state level, there's kind of this inherent understanding that once we've approved a program, it can't get up and running without the seeds that it needs to get started. And as long as it's kind of done in a quote unquote respectful way, meaning, you're not out there flaunting it under people's noses. You're not, coming back with boxcars full of seeds. You're not shipping back, flowering plants, but you're getting those things that you need to get started. Typically, you'll get a little bit of leeway there. What kind of experiences have you seen with that, Jim?
Well, yeah, so we've had clients, not so much seeds, but clones, where they'll drive a trailer full of clones, say from Colorado up to Montana to get the state of Montana growing. Yeah, so it's not just seeds that you're looking at, but also clones. And yes, the regulators tend not to ask where those initial plants, those clones or seeds come from.
So, as long as you go in and you're above board with everything, you should be okay. But that's only half the battle with seeds, is how do I get my hands on them? The other half of the battle, which is just as important, is what kind of seeds are you going to get? What strains do you want to grow? Or if you're a dispensary, what strains do you want to sell? So you can be checking around with the cultivators and find out if any of them are going to be growing those strains. But certainly from the cultivator's perspective, there's very unique issues that you have, for different types of strains. Some require more light, some require more water, higher temperatures, lower temperatures. But if you're going to be in cultivation, this is stuff you need to know up front, because like anything else, you need to be out there right now looking for and even possibly negotiating for the purchase of the seeds that you're going to start out with and the strains that you're going to grow initially. And if you wait until the last minute, what you're going to find is you're scrambling, and some of the strains and seeds might no longer be available, and then you lose out on that type of a situation. In Illinois, because the newest cultivation licenses are going to be these craft grow licenses, meaning that the license holders are going to be limited in the space on which they can grow, the strains that you choose to grow are also going to become very, very important in this regard. There's limited shelf space in Illinois on the dispensaries that are out there right now. And we have the Crescos and the GTIs and the Revolutions of the world, who are all big, huge multi-state operators, but based in Illinois, and all have their own grows and dispensaries here in Illinois. And the simple fact of the matter is, and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong on the numbers here, but if you are a craft grower, in my opinion, there is no way that you can competitively compete with a big grower like Cresco on a standard popular strain such as Blue Dream. They're going to be able to do it much cheaper than you. They're going to be able to do it in much larger quantities than you. And I just don't think you can go head to head with them on that. Would you agree, Jim?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, when you're talking 100,000 square feet of cultivation, you're going to get huge economies of scale. That's actually what myself and Bridge West gets paid to do quite a bit, is to improve their efficiencies and lower their cost per gram to grow. But you craft growers, craft license holders, when they're issued, will be in good shape in Illinois because you've had a medical and an adult use program for some time. So you shouldn't have any issues getting your strains and your clones and your seeds lined up for your initial plants in the ground.
Well, I think that's true, and there's certainly plants here and sources for that. However, that leads us into the next portion of this section, which is really when you decide what kind of a strain you're going to grow, and if you realize that on a cost basis you can't compete with Cresco on the standard strains, what I tell my clients is it's all in the genetics. You've got to go out and you've got to find those special genetics and those killer strains that the groups like Cresco just haven't messed around with yet, because they may not be as cost effective for them, or they're doing so well, selling Budweiser beer. Why do they have to worry about, selling some, really fancy high-end quality beer? But if you as a smaller craft grow want to go out and find, some really unique strains and some really top flight genetics, that helps you in a number of ways, not the least of which is you become a cultivator that all the other dispensaries are seeking out, as opposed to you having to go to door finding dispensaries to take your brands from you. And it's very doable and very competitive. And to go back to the beer example, certainly here in Illinois, Budweiser, Miller, and Coors probably outsell, any other kind of beers by such a large margin, and they're very standard beers. And you can't compete with them brewing those beers. But yet in Illinois, we have a brewery called Three Floyds, and Three Floyds brews small batch beers with funny names and fancy tastes and all sorts of stuff. And they have become their own little high-end entity, so that what we typically have on most Fridays is a huge line of cars lined up outside the Three Floyds brewery waiting to buy the 1 case limit that each person can purchase, because you usually can't find it in the regular liquor stores because it sells out so fast. So people who could walk into 50 liquor stores between here and there and buy all the Budweiser they want, drive past all of them to get to this place to buy this beer. And if you're growing strains that are that unique and special, then the same thing will happen with you. And that's how you survive and prosper in an industry that already has giants operating in it.
Yes, and as we move to the next slide, as I'm sure that the people in our audience know, some strains will get you 2 pounds of plant, some strains will get you a half a pound of plant.
Yes.
So be thinking about that when it comes to how you're going to build out your 5,000 square feet. Are you going to go for, plants that give you higher yields or more lower yields?
Absolutely. But once again, for purposes of getting your grow ready to go based on the strains that you've selected, and this is why it's important, what type of an environment are you going to have to create there? What type of a grow schedule do you need? How can you set it up so that you have constant budding? One of the advantages of growing indoors is you control the climate, so you can grow year round. That gives effective cultivators the ability to stagger their grow schedules. So every few weeks they have, a new harvest of a certain number of plants. And then that way they don't run into a situation where they have months where they're sitting around waiting for their next crop to come in, like you do if you're an outside grower and you really only get the benefit of the summer growing season. When that's over, if you haven't grown enough to carry you all the way through the year, then you're waiting for next year, and your customers are waiting. So
yes, we call that the perpetual harvest. Well, so you got one room, you've got your clones going. At the other end of the facility, you have mature plants that are ready to be taken down and harvested. In another room, you've got plants hanging upside down, drying.
well, and now I know the name, which is good. But yeah, this is a good way for people to do it. But again, all of this is going to play off of the idea of what strains are you growing, what type of volume are you looking to produce, what types of dispensaries have you been able to touch base with, or again, conversely, dispensaries, as you're trying to decide on how much storage space you need and how large your vault has to be. Same type of a thing. What range of products do you want to be selling? What types of products do you want to just be selling? Flower? Do you want to be selling extract? Do you want to be selling vapes and topicals and edibles? And none of these are decisions that should be waiting until the last minute. These should all be factored in. And to the extent you had to list some of this information on your application to show the state you were thinking about it, now you really have to build up on all of that. You really have to have a much better plan in mind, so that once again, we can't emphasize enough how important it is to be able to hit the ground running once you find out you've won that license.
Yep. And Larry, just for housekeeping, we're about halfway through our hour, and we are not quite halfway through our slides. So probably we'll just be able to touch briefly on the next 10 slides, so we have time for questions and answers.
Understood. Okay. Packaging and labeling, we can be really quick on this. Obviously, it's a brand builder, and at the same time, you have to be compliant with state law. We talk about federal agencies as well, because even though marijuana is still illegal and you run into law enforcement problems with it, hemp is now legal, and now you're running into regulatory problems with it, with the FTC coming in and saying whether or not your content is acceptable. This is where a good lawyer comes into play. You need to know what you can or cannot put on your labels. If you wait, then you'll be paying us a lot more money to try to solve your problems.
Very good.
As we talked about before, identifying sources for seeds and clones. You want to have them on hand. You want to be ready to go. Just for those of us that have lived through it and seen it, we can't emphasize enough the advantage you will have hitting the market first.
And the point I would make is at the end there, at the bottom, develop those relationships with the people that you're going to need to do business with. One thing I find very pleasant about the cannabis industry is we all do try to really help each other out. We're in a situation where cultivators are going to sell everything that they grow. And I find them very generous with their knowledge and helping out newcomers to the market. And then when they need a pound or two, they can go back to you, and you can turn around and help them.
And you know what? That's a great point, Jim. And actually, what Jim is stating is a message that I heard at the very first cannabis conference I ever went to in 2013, when Jim Marty happened to be one of the presenters. And that's exactly it. This is an industry that is competitive, but we know that it's highly regulated, and we know that there's ways that people feel about it that don't necessarily work to our advantage yet. And it's important for everyone to succeed. Yes, you want to do well, obviously, but it's important for the guy down the street to do well too, because if you're successful, but the other 4 dispensaries in your town are all failing miserably, and people don't get a good perception of them and kind of see them as maybe a little more seedy, a little more run down, always having the police come by because there's violations, that hurts the public perception that we're trying to establish. And so for right now, everybody wins when anyone wins. And so we try to promote that and make sure, like the Jim says, if your neighbor down the street is out of a certain strain and you happen to be sitting on an abundance of it, share. There'll be plenty of opportunity for you to do the same back in return. And these are all just things that ultimately make the market very workable, very compliant, and allow you to be able to operate within the restrictions that are imposed by state and federal law.
Yep. And once again, it's very much a relationship industry. And that's what we're saying here on this screen, is develop a workable and compliant marketing plan. Larry, you want to touch briefly on marketing?
Yeah. So marketing is obviously very important here, right? You're going into an industry, depending on what state you're going into, whether you're the first ones in, but there's going to be competitors, or whether you're coming into a state, let's say like Illinois, that already has an established adult use market. So with marketing, you're really doing two things. One, you're trying to develop your brand, and you're trying to bring people, if you're a cultivator, you want them to smoke your strains. If you're a dispensary, you want them to purchase it from your store. I don't profess to be a marketing expert. I'm an attorney, but I can tell you that in marketing, there are obviously cannabis laws that do apply in terms of what you can and cannot say. And these are things that you need to be very careful about. Again, law firms like the Hoban Law Group have attorneys who do nothing but specialize in advertising content, website content, labeling content, to help you be able to get the maximum message out and minimize the risks that you might otherwise face. But the other part about marketing that I like to throw in there is this is part of being a team player. Marketing shouldn't be, three guys sitting around outside looking like a bunch of, high school dropouts, sharing a rusty pipe with one another, and, oh, this is great. And at least I notice when I see stories about marijuana on the news, it's not uncommon to see that very clip leading into it. That's what the public perceives still marijuana as. And there's nothing wrong in your marketing with showing, to the extent you're allowed in your state, the limits of what you can do, but demonstrating that it's something that it's for everybody, and that everybody does it, and that it's a positive thing. And once again, by helping to win over that part of the population that's still not on board with this, they don't have to smoke it, just like everybody doesn't have to drink alcohol. But the idea is that we recognize that other people like to do it, and so long as they do it responsibly, that's their business. And this is where marketing really comes in. We want to be like, alcohol, in the sense that people understand that it exists, that understands what it does, and more importantly, what it doesn't do, and then says, hey, if that's what you like, go do it. Just be safe.
Yes, and then a comment I would make when you're building your website and your messaging, I would say build into your plans curbside delivery as well as a delivery service itself.
Well, certainly, and to the extent that the states in which you're in will allow it, and just to touch on it really quickly, this is how we see how the best laid plans in Illinois. The message was, all marijuana must be in the dispensary. All marijuana must be bought and sold in the dispensary. Money can only be exchanged in the dispensary. And I would sit down with my clients and draw it up in big red letters. You will lose your license if you do not follow these rules. And then the pandemic hit, and the governor said, curbside service. And all of a sudden, everybody called me up and said, can I really exchange money and hand them the product in their car outside? And ultimately, we learned, of course, that the answer is yes. But the hope is, now that we've got it started through the pandemic and people see that it's not a disaster, that this might be something that they will allow going forward. And of course, home delivery is ultimately the holy grail for people. And we are very hopeful and encouraged that soon Illinois will be able to cross over that hurdle as well. Okay, well, transportation, you can grow the best marijuana in the world, but if you don't get it to the dispensaries, it doesn't do you any good. If you're applying for a processing license, you got to get your finished products to a dispensary. If you're at a dispensary, you got to get those products to your door. Everybody in this industry has to pay attention to transportation, just like you would in any other industry, for starters, right? Because it's the lifeblood of the industry. It's how the products move around and put them, it's how we get from the ground to the sales desk. In this industry, though, transportation becomes a much bigger problem. Why? Because A, there are people out there that know that there's trucks driving around loaded down with marijuana. And while we all like to think the best of our fellow citizens, there's always going to be some people out there who might try to take advantage of that opportunity to get their hands on some product in an illicit manner. That's very important. What else do we have with transportation, though, that we typically just don't have with any other industry? And that's the risk of confiscation. And as Jim was mentioning before, especially when you go over a border, and it doesn't matter if it's a state border or an international border. Well, it does matter, because if it's marijuana, you shouldn't be going over any borders anyway. But even within the state, if you're driving around with marijuana delivering it, you have potential problems for confiscation, depending on who pulls you over. With CBD, it's a much bigger problem, because the 2018 Farm Bill allows interstate transportation, but a lot of the law enforcement agencies in certain states around the country haven't gotten the message yet. And so there's still a high risk of confiscation. And this all factors into transportation, your cost, your loss of risk. Does the shipper or the receiver handle that if the product gets confiscated? These are things that you want to be thinking about in advance. And once again, be ready to go so that when you start operating, you can have contracts all drawn up for people to sign.
Yes, and it's not just cannabis you're going to be driving around with. It's going to be a lot of cash. MasterCard and Visa are not on board. If somebody tells you they can get you set up with MasterCard and Visa, best not to do business with them, because MasterCard and Visa are not on board, which means you're going to be receiving a lot of cash in the front door as your patients and customers buy cannabis. So you're going to have internal controls over how the cash is handled. You're going to have counting of cash witnessed, bundled, packaged in non-resealable plastic bags, and then transported by a secured, what's the term I'm looking for? A security van to come in.
Armored car.
An armored car, there you go. So be thinking about how you're going to handle your cash and internal controls over cash. Short commercial for Bridge West. That is something we help design and build, is internal controls over cash.
Seed to sale tracking. Jim touched on that a few minutes ago when we were talking about equipment that you're going to have to go out and purchase. Every state has seed to sale tracking. And for those of you who may not know what seed to sale tracking is, that allows the state to track a product, a plant, literally from when the seed is dropped in the ground and assigned a barcode number up until the point that the plant is harvested and then trimmed, and then its leaves and its biomass are turned into various products. And literally all of this has to be accounted for, and you have to be able to show a chain of control and custody that demonstrates that this isn't marijuana that came in through the side door, or even more importantly, that there's not marijuana going out your side door. Every state has a different seed to sale tracking system, but you need to find out what requirements your state has for this. Typically, that allows the state government to be able to access the information as well, so that it can keep track and make sure that everything's being run on a legal and legitimate basis. But check with your consultants, check with your state to find out what the right system is, and make sure you get that system ordered and ready to go, because you're going to have to learn how to use it too. Some of these require a certain degree of skill and training to be able to use them effectively.
Yes, and as I said earlier, these systems are very, very good at tracking weight, grams, ounces, pounds, eighths of ounces from seed to sale, or from clone to sale, I should say. Parallel to that is your cost accounting system. So one of my favorite accounting jokes, and there's not that many accounting jokes. One of the few accounting jokes that's out there that I like is that if you don't know what your costs are, you will pretty soon, which means that you'll be sitting there at the end of the month with all these unpaid bills and saying, how do we ever incur all these expenses? So along with these tracking systems, your accounting system runs parallel. You need to know how much it costs you to grow a gram or an ounce or a pound, and therefore you can price your product so that you are making a profit.
That's a good point. But as we said at the end of that last slide, again, the system is the key to your system, because without knowing, having the right seed to sale tracking, you can't legally operate. And part of this seed to sale tracking system is you want to check and make sure that the product you're going with has a good performance record, and just as importantly, a good reputation for service. We've seen horror stories of dispensaries whose seed to sale tracking system goes out and effectively knocks them out of business until they can get it up and running again. So you really want to make sure that you've got the best system out there.
I think we've talked about security.
Yep. Security is just, yes, and this whole industry is about security. If you're a brick and mortar store, if you're a dispensary or a cultivation center, the state's going to require you to have a security system. So you probably have already looked into this for purposes of your application, but now you got to be working with your security contractor to say, hey, How much lead time do you need to dive in? At what point in the construction process do I call you and bring you in? What else can you add to the whole process? You know, you don't want to call them in 3 weeks later and say, oh, you've already put up the drywall. All my wiring had to go through the drywall, right? So make sure you know what you're going to use and who's going to do it for you, and that everybody's aware of timing.
Yes, and a little note from our experiences here in Colorado, we haven't really had that much of a problem with armed robbery or break-ins because our cannabis has gotten fairly cheap. When you can buy an ounce for $100, it makes it almost not worth stealing. But about your security cameras, people don't really look at those security cameras until something goes wrong, and that's when they become a key. So
Right.
you'll be having, you know, your various parts of your operation covered by security cameras 24/7. Nobody's really going to be looking at those, but if something goes wrong, if you have a break-in, they're going to not just look at the period of time for the break-in, they're going to go back and look at the last 3 or 4 months and see if you've been compliant. So remember that everything's on camera, and if something goes wrong, they will go back 3 or 4 months looking at those recordings. Larry, have you had any experience with security cameras?
Well, actually, interesting, not within the context of the cannabis industry, but in my prior life, when I was operating primarily as a business attorney, I had one client who had a couple of instances where competitors were coming around late at night and damaging his building, breaking his windows, and the security camera technology was all brand new. So the first security cameras saw somebody come by, but they weren't clear enough to be able to see who they were. So, you know, it was a work in progress. Now, some of this equipment that I've seen at some of my clients in their dispensaries is unbelievable. I mean, they can zero into a 1 foot by 1 foot square on the floor if they have to see just about anything that's going on in there.
Yep.
Okay, well, construction and build out is, you know, probably single-handedly going to be your most time-consuming thing once you get your license. You know, nobody wants to start doing the build out until you know if you've gotten the license. And then once you get the license, you always feel like you never have enough time. But there's things you can start doing in advance. Who's going to be your contractors? The contractors that now work in this industry, most of them who have experience in it, understand that you're going to reach out to them before you've won your license, and you know you're going to want to be working with them to be prepared up to the point you get, so that when you get your license, you can dive in and you can negotiate deals with the contractors and architects to, you know, for how you can price that and how it can work if you don't get your license ultimately, and things like that. But you know, you want this going. You want to have architectural plans already drawn. You want to make sure that you're going to have zoning approvals for everything that you want to do, and more importantly, that you have all required construction permits, and that your plans satisfy the building codes and everything of whatever community you're in. You have to get your utilities so that they're up and running and ready to go. Are they serving your property even? And if they are they serving your property in sufficient levels in terms of what you're going to need? If not, what's the process to go to the city or the municipality in which you're going to be operating and get those services extended out to your facility? What type of permits do you need for that? What are the costs and everything? Once your building is completed, what type of approval do you need on the back end from the building departments? These are all things that can all be done in advance, so that really the only thing you haven't done is actually, you know, start the construction work until you find out whether or not you get the license.
Yes, and the comment I would make is some of the biggest delays, unexpected delays, can occur at the building permit level. So have that check ready to go. I just had a client in Massachusetts write a $75,000 check for his cultivation facility in Massachusetts. So have you and get to know your regulators, get to know your inspectors ahead of time, and be ready to run down there with that check as soon as you possibly can to get the permitting process started, because that's something you cannot control. And some of these folks are in no big hurry in some of these city building departments.
That's very, very true. That's a great point, Jim. At a minimum, you need to talk with somebody who has experience in pulling those types of permits and find out what's standard procedure in your neighborhood, so that if you have to expedite, you can do that. One thing that I didn't put on the slides, but I thought of after we finished them up, and I'm seeing a whole lot of this these days too, in Illinois in particular. Obviously, people don't want to finalize a deal to purchase real estate, and they don't want to finalize a deal to sign a 10-year lease until they know if they have a license. So everybody signs contingencies. In Illinois, for the dispensaries, we submitted our applications in January. We were told we would hear on April 1st. So we went to the landlords or the potential sellers and we negotiated contingencies. Pay you $5,000 or $10,000 or whatever it is. You'll hold it for me for this period of time. Great. This is the way that this industry typically operates. Now we have a new wrinkle because now we have these delays. So in Illinois, if you thought you were getting your dispensary license on April 1st, or if you're a landlord and you thought by April 1st, you would know whether or not this person was going to be locked into a lease, guess what? It's 8 months later and we still don't know. So now everybody goes running back and sees, is the applicant supposed to be paying more for a contingency over this period of time? Does the owner have the right to say, forget it, I don't want to wait this long anymore, I'm going to kick you out? These are things that are all very, very important that need to be looked at and addressed in advance. None of us anticipated this type of delay. Now it's happened. We can't let these problems come up a second time. We have to be ready for them.
Yeah, this is an important point. And again, they're not in the slides, but on your leases, try to negotiate a purchase option. The value of your real estate has two values. It has a value before you're up and running and a value after you're up and running. So what you pay for your real estate or you're paying in rent is going to be a lot less in value than after you're permitted. So try to lock in a purchase price and don't go for a super long lease period. I was with a client the other day and they're doing very well here in Denver. And I said, why don't you buy your real estate? You got a nice building here. You got grow in the back. You got a retail up front. He goes, no, our landlord really likes our $30,000 a month rent payment. And we signed a 29-year lease. I said, who signs a 29-year lease?
Wow.
So don't sign any leases until you have it looked at very carefully by a good cannabis attorney like Larry or one of his office mates.
Well, thank you. Yes. And that, like we say, once you've signed the document, there's nothing we can do for you. Before you sign it, there's lots we can do for you. Please keep that in mind.
We have 5 more slides and we do want time for questions and answers. So we'll hit on these briefly. But yeah, you're going to be in the HR business. You're going to be the head of HR for your company. So get to know your local ordinances and rules regarding paid time off, sick time, paid family leave. Consider hiring a company out there. I don't mind giving a plug to our good friends over at Work, WURK. They can be your HR department for you, take a lot of these headaches off of your desk and do those for you. But Larry, you want to make some points on this slide?
Yeah, sure. Just really quickly, you have 2 issues here, right? The first one is standard employment issues, and all the things that Jim just said are very accurate. You need to decide who are your key high-level employees. Those people you're obviously going to have contracts with. Your line workers or your bud tenders. You may not need as detailed a contract for those people, but you need to get a map and an understanding of what your workforce is going to be. You need to start looking for that workforce because, again, if you get your license, you want to be able to show up the next day with as large a workforce as possible. You can't just be starting then to put it all together. Things like employee handbooks are very good. They're very useful. You don't need that on day one. That's something that you'll grow into over time. And when you get large enough, you'll do it. You need to know what your state's law is with respect to a health plan and what type of health benefits you have to provide for employees. And you have to be ready to move on that too. The other side of employment, though, that's very, very important is in this industry, some people are disqualified from working in it if they have the wrong type of conviction on their record or if they can't satisfy other conditions depending on the state. You need to know what your state's rules are for workers in a plant touching business, whether it's a cultivator or a dispensary, so you can make sure that you are only hiring people who qualify. The worst thing in the world is to find out on day one that your master grower can't work with you because he has a conviction that he forgot to tell you about, and now the state won't issue him the security badge that he needs to be able to work in a cultivation house. I've seen that happen before. You don't want it to happen to you. Banking. This is almost more Jim's topic. What I will tell you from my end of it, though, is you've made it this far. If you've gotten your application submitted, a lot of people think, well, good, I don't have to do anything on the finance side till I find out. Wrong, because again, you have to be ready on day one to move. You need to be talking to investors today. If I get a license, You know, will you invest in my company? Obviously, if I don't get a license, I'm not going to take your money, or I'll give you back the money. You know, if you can set up a banking relationship, because Jim's right, if you're successful, you're going to have a boatload of cash on your hands. What are you going to do with that? Who's going to take it off of your hands and put it in a safe place so that you don't have to worry about it on a daily basis? These are relationships that you need to set up, and you need to set up now. Again, so that you're ready to go, so that you have an idea of what you're going to need. But nothing is as important as making sure you have a strong financial system that's set up and ready to operate.
Yes. There are banks in Illinois, because we have clients in Illinois that send us checks when they pay their fees to us. So be upfront with your bank, your financial institution. Tell them that you're in the cannabis business. Don't tell them you're a pizza shop and try to mislabel what you're doing. Sit down with your banker and say, what is your cannabis policy at this bank? And then you might be surprised to hear them say, well, we actually have some policies. And be prepared to spend probably $5,000 a month to have a checking account. And that's not because the bank is greedy. It's because if the bank is going to accept cannabis clients, they have to set up a very stringent security operation inside of that bank. They need a whole cannabis department to comply with all the federal rules and regulations. Believe it or not, even though cannabis is illegal at the federal level, the federal government has guidelines for banks on how to bank the cannabis industry. Then quickly, and I talked about handling cash, internal controls over cash. Keep in mind, your main assets of a cannabis business are going to be cash and marijuana. Two things that disappear very quickly if you don't have good internal controls over them. On investors and those documents there at the end of the page, very, very important. As we sit here at the end of 2020, you can go to jail a lot faster raising money than you can selling marijuana. There was just an article in the paper here of a guy, he had some cannabis violations, but what really sent him to jail for 12 years was violating securities rules when he was raising money. He defrauded his investors, and now he's sitting 12 years in a federal pen.
That's true. Well, we touched on accountants. I've already given you my pitch for Jim, so I will let him talk on the importance of these issues.
Yeah. You want to have monthly financial statements. You want to have a good bookkeeper. You want to set up, as I've been talking about, financial controls and know where you're at. Really good control and accounting over inventory. Towards the bottom there, your financial plan. Even though you cannot deduct things other than cost of goods sold, we have clients who are very, very profitable, even though they can't take all their deductions. However, I have to say that is the exception. Surprisingly, many of our 400 clients are not profitable on an after-tax basis. In fact, several of our clients, there's dozens of clients of ours that are actually in excess of 100% tax bracket. So you need a good CPA. We're happy to take your business, but there's other good CPAs in Illinois that are friends of ours, and they'll do a good job for you. But yeah, your accounting is a very important piece of this, because that'll tell you whether or not you're making any money.
Yep.
By the way, this is slide 19 of 20.
Okay. Community outreach. This is something that I also learned at the very first marijuana seminar I went to back in 2013. And I was really impressed by this. You're going into a community, and the community may or may not internally be ready to actually deal with this concept and to deal with the all the new things that come up with marijuana, and how to treat it fairly, and how to understand that, you know, you're not out to get all the grade school kids high. Here's what we tell people. This is a perfect opportunity right now. You don't have the pressure of the application over your head or anything else. Go out and start talking to people. Talk to the chief of police. Walk in and introduce yourself. Introduce yourself to the mayor of your town, or the city commissioner or planner. Introduce yourself to the high school principal, to the local religious leaders, to the librarian even. The idea here is not to do anything improper. The idea is to go in and let people know you're just another guy. This is just another business. There's not, we don't want people to think that we're coming in with devious plans, or that we're going to, try to push our product on everyone, whether they want it or not. quite the opposite. You want them to be excited to be on your side. And my line to them is, hey, this gives you the opportunity to be out in front and shaping the message for the people who live in your community, because whether you approve it in your community or not, it's going to make its way into your community. But let the chief of police know who you are. Tell the chief of police, come by whenever you want. We're not hiding anything. In fact, please come by so we can show you the operation, so you can understand specifically what we're doing and why it's legal. They may very well appreciate that, because they don't necessarily know all the updates on the laws of marijuana and everything. So just a good way to get started.
Yeah, you want to be a good neighbor. You want to, again, let people know what you're doing. You want to give back to the community when you can, either in terms of time or money on various community projects. So yes, I agree 100% what Larry's saying. Get to know your community and be a good neighbor. And we are now at the end of our hour, and this is our last slide.
Yes. And look, this is really just more common sense than anything else. If you give Jim, and if you give me another 2 days, I'm sure we could probably come up with another 20 things to add to that list that we've seen with clients, or that we just know is the right thing to do and that you have to be on top of. So don't take this list and go home and use it as anything more than a starting point. It is a good starting point, and it hits on the important issues. But business people are business people, and you have your own gut feelings about things that are important, or your own internal knowledge, or your own experiences from running business. Don't shortchange those. Just be cautious that if you go into an area, to stop for a minute and consider how the fact that this is a cannabis business might impact that in a way that you had not previously thought of, because some rules do change when you cross over the line into a Schedule I controlled substance market.
Very good. And Tricia, do we have any questions?
No, right now there are no questions in the Q&A box. I actually wrote down a couple of things that I thought would be people might be curious about or need to
Sure.
know. So one of the things is you said that there are a handful of your clients who are profitable after taxes, and the majority are not. So
Yes.
one of the questions that I have is, so what separates those that are profitable from those that are not profitable? Specifically, I guess really what I'm asking is, what are the things that they're doing that's actually making them profitable, that people could be thinking about doing now as they get ready to enter into their business?
Yep, the answer to that, it's very easy to say but hard to do, is you need to get what I call the threefer. So you need to grow it for $1 and sell it for $3. So that's a 67% gross profit margin. And that's what you need to have enough gross profit. You have to pay tax on that gross profit, and still have enough money left over to pay your selling, general, and administrative costs, and hopefully have some profit. So I look at people's books all the time, and I'll say, your gross profit margin is 35%. There's no way you're going to make enough money to pay your taxes and have anything left over. So now you're in a competitive market, so you can't just charge whatever you want. You have to be within your market, $10 for a joint or whatever it is in Illinois. So therefore, it comes back to your cost to grow. I look at people's books, and I'll figure out their cost to grow a pound, and I'll say, your cost to grow a pound is about $2,500. You could buy pounds on the open market for $1,500 to $2,000, and you wonder why you're not making any money. So it really comes down to controlling your costs, growing your cannabis for a third of what you can sell it for. Cost accounting is extremely important.
Okay. So there's a question in the Q&A box now. The person says, as an SCA, having these preliminary conversations and setting up are challenging because resources are limited. How does a conversation go? If working with utilities, how do you set up accounts if everything is contingent?
Larry?
Okay, so yeah, sure. Well, the basic question there about how you would set up something, with the utility on a contingency, it's like you would do anytime you're building new construction, or you're going to move into somewhere that's currently vacant. In other words, you let them know when you're going to be taking over ownership or control of the property, and you give them the date by when you need to start having power. Now, I understand that if you haven't won the license yet, you don't know for sure what day you're going to need it turned on. But if you ask them, how much advance notice do you need, or on the day that I give you notice, how many days after that will it take before I get that power or that service, then that lets you plan accordingly, so that if they say, look, it's going to take 2 or 3 days, and then you get the license and you say, okay, boom, now I'm in, then you're okay. Another way that I've seen people do it is they just simply go ahead and they set up an electrical account, an electrical bill and utilities bills, and operate under the idea that, look, before I start operating, my electrical costs are not going to be very significant, but at least I have the utilities all hooked up already. And if I don't win the license, then I just cancel everything. Or you can work out a deal with the owner of the property to, to be able to, for them to maintain the utilities on the property now. And then if you're going to walk in and lease the property from them, then you can contact the utility companies just to change the account over into your name.
Excellent. Good points.
Okay, there's no other question in the Q&A box right now.
Okay.
One of the other things that I just wanted to bring up, because you brought up a lot of topics that either we have covered or we have allowed for providing services for after licensing. So I just want to make sure that everyone is aware. After you've received your license, we have currently in our agreement with DCEO allowed for individual assessments and project plans for 40 licensees with the licenses that come out of Department of Ag. So that's the infusers, craft growers, and transporters. We are in conversations now with DCEO about doing something similar for dispensary licensees. And in addition to that, we also have a number of services available relating to security and HR. So if you guys remember from the previous sessions that we had with the providers that we had to provide those services. So security assessments, and that would be, and some of those assessments would be after your security has been set up for someone to come in and actually, like, look at all of your weak areas, so on and so forth. So security assessments, and then also HR consulting. All of those services would be free of charge to you because, again, this is all provided for with funding from the state, from DCEO. So I want to make sure I put that out there because those topics were brought up, and those things we really haven't announced yet because we really haven't got any licenses. So I want to make sure that you all are aware of those things that we will be providing.
And Tricia, one thing I'd just like to throw in there, that if any of the people who are watching this video today, or if you wind up showing it to other people at a later time, if they do have questions, ask them to put the questions together and send them to you. And then if you would forward them over to Jim or I'm sure we can probably help you out and answer those questions for you.
Yep, absolutely.
Yes. And I was going to make a comment too, is, please feel free, Tricia, to keep this PowerPoint presentation in your online library, and people are free to use it at any time.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, and for those of you who have been with us for a while, you guys know that I typically put the presentations and the recordings in our Dropbox folder with all of our prior presentations and recordings. So this one will be out there within 24 hours.
Great.
Excellent.
Okay, so the next question we have, how does the conversation go to obtain desirable strains?
Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to find the strain. So for instance, if you happen to find yourself on the West Coast and you go into a dispensary and you find a strain that you really like, or you happen to be somewhere and a friend introduces you to a strain that you really like, the first step is you have to identify who the cultivator is. Once you identify who the cultivator is, then based on who that is, you have to decide how you approach them. My point being that if the cultivator is somebody in the Green Triangle out in the California area, they probably aren't going to take nearly as kindly to you walking up to their front door as they would if you find somebody who knows them, who you can work through, so that they know who they're dealing with on the front end. But typically the way the conversation goes is we tell the cultivator that if they will sign a license and allow my client, a craft grower in Illinois, to grow their strain in Illinois and call it whatever name they've given it and call it by that name, then we will, of course, pay the cultivator in California, the owner of the strain, a certain percentage, 5%, 10%, whatever is negotiated on the sale for allowing us to use their strain. From the cultivator's perspective, they like it because it helps build their brand nationally and takes it outside of just the state market in which they're currently operating. Some cultivators are reluctant to do it because you discover that the strain that you really like is not being grown in illegal cultivations. So that might make it somewhat limiting. And certainly people who are continuing to grow on the black market are very, very reluctant to enter into any type of formal business relationships with people regarding their products. But in California and Colorado, the states that I view as the the more experienced states where they've been doing it for so long that's where the great strains are. You can find people who will enter into those types of agreements with you and expand their reach into your market and then help you by giving you a good product to sell.
Okay. And there was another piece in that I'll answer. The question was, will the slides be available? Yes, I already have the slides. As a matter of fact, I think I've already put them on the Dropbox because I know I saved them earlier. So they might actually already be out there. Just don't have the recording out there yet because obviously we're in the middle of it. Are there any other questions? And I know I am hesitant to end because I always, without fail, start to end, and then a question pops up in the Q&A box.
Well, that's why I say, Tricia, don't hesitate. If you get a question this afternoon or tomorrow, just send it along to us.
Yeah. And then one other question, not a legal question, another accounting type question. Is there any specific, and I think I know the answer to this because my dad is an accountant, but is there any specific software that you recommend or product that you might recommend to help people with their accounting setup as they get ready to start their businesses and get everything set up, and get their accounts set up so that they're not struggling to try to do these things while they're also racking up expenses with the startup costs?
Yes. For most of your craft applicants, QuickBooks will be just fine. For larger cultivators, you get up to 50, 100,000 square feet, you're doing 10 million or above. There's Microsoft 365, that's their manufacturer's package, and they actually do have a cannabis specific module for cannabis cultivators to really get drilled down into their cost accounting. So that's Microsoft 365. And then for the smaller operators, QuickBooks is just fine.
Okay. Another question. I am waiting for a transportation license. What should I be focused on as far as my business setup and accounting setup while I am waiting for my license?
Larry?
Well, on the business side of it, I would certainly say that now is exactly the time to be doing a few things. Number one, making sure that you have the right equipment you're going to need, right? What kind of trucks or transportation equipment are you going to use? Are you going to be able to purchase these vehicles? Or are you going to have to lease them? And if so, what restrictions might you get from the owners? And will those restrictions prohibit you from doing what you want to do? You have to put together a security plan in terms of how you're going to transport cash and marijuana around for people. You're going to have to come up with a contract that properly allocates risk and responsibility. You're going to have to locate, you're going to probably have to make yourself bonded some way so that you can cover the costs of any problems that may arise along the way while you're transporting the product. you know, and these are just a few things that I can think of off the top of my head, not to mention that if you're in transportation right now is a great time to be going out and talking either to existing cultivators or to go talk to those, find out the names of those people who have submitted cultivation applications. And there's all sorts of groups on the internet and Facebook and things like that where you can go and locate some of these types of people and you know, go start talking to them. There's a craft growers association that was formed because they're the ones who are filing the lawsuit to get the state to try to announce the winners. Go to them and ask for a list of the members of their association, and so that you can reach out and start letting people know that you will be a transportation option for them. The other thing I would do is I would, you know, go talk to people who have run transportation companies in other states to get some idea of pricing and things like that, so you can come up with a pricing scheme that protects you, but you know, would be seen as reasonable within the industry.
And I'm going to chime in on one of those, which is the association. So after, if you weren't on our session on Tuesday, because the attorney who filed on behalf of the association was our presenter, one of the things that came out of that session, I think I actually mentioned it in that session, is I probably will be putting together a session with the different associations that at least that I am aware of around the state. So I do know one of the founders. I have been in multiple conversations with him. Actually, I think a couple of people in the Craft Growers Association. And then there's another association that has reached out to me also. And so I am looking at the possibility of bringing them all together into a session to talk about what each of the associations are doing, programming wise, whatnot, services that they're offering to their members, you know, those types of details. And then the other piece, just as ancillary to that, is you also know that we have done a handful of social equity applicant networking sessions. And actually, those people have actually been on those sessions. So those sessions are also a great way to be able to networking and find others throughout the state. And then thirdly, we also have our directory that we put together for you guys because, you know, as people were going through the process of putting together their applications, that was one of the questions that I got quite often, which was, can you connect me with, you know, I'm this provider, can you connect me with that provider on the other side, and we could possibly do business together, which, you know, so I put the directory together so that I don't have to be the middleman, and so that I don't have to necessarily, you know, find people who might be willing to have those conversations or have to keep track of who I've had conversations with and who's doing what, because I've talked with many of you guys. As you guys may know, there's over 450 of you in our database. So so we're doing some of those things to help you be able to cultivate and create those relationships. And so I'm looking to, you know, see what else we can do to serve you in, you know, building that bridge.
Okay.
So I don't see any other questions in the Q&A. So thank you both for presenting today.
Absolutely.
Thank you everyone for coming out. Please be on the lookout for me. For a email from me to respond to the survey and concerning this presentation and all of our previous presentations, you know, in the last couple of weeks.
Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay, thanks for the invite.